As Zelensky arrived in Paris, diplomatic relations between Washington and Moscow were teetering on the brink of collapse. Russia expelled 10 U.S. diplomats, including U.S. Ambassador to Russia John Sullivan, in retaliation for sweeping sanctions Biden imposed on Russia, and after Washington abandoned threats to deploy 2 warships along Russia's Black Sea coast. Last month, Russia recalled its ambassador to the United States, normally the last diplomatic step before the outbreak of war, over Biden's extraordinary remark calling Putin a killer. Recent weeks had seen a flare-up of the conflict provoked by the February 2014 NATO-backed coup in Ukraine, in which Washington and Berlin backed far-right forces to topple a pro-Russian government in Kiev. The coup rapidly split the country along linguistic lines, as Russian-speaking areas of the country opposed the new far-right government. Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine and to rejoin Russia, while pro-Moscow separatists took over the Donbas in eastern Ukraine. Tensions have soared since Biden's inauguration, after which the Kiev regime cut off water supplies to Crimea and adopted a Crimean platform calling to militarily reconquer the Donbas and Crimea, which hosts a key Russian naval base at Sevastopol. This policy, if enacted, clearly entails going to war with Russia. Moscow retaliated by massing troops along the Russian-Ukrainian border and threatening to seal off parts of the Black Sea. Yesterday morning, before the talks with Zelensky, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov asked Berlin and Paris to restrain Kiev. He said, "It would be very important for us if Mr. Macron and Ms. Merkel used their influence during this video conference with Mr. Zelensky to explain to him the possibility of a definitive cessation of all provocations on the front lines in eastern Ukraine." After Zelensky's meeting with Macron, in a working lunch, Zelensky issued a statement calling for resumption of talks between the Moscow and Kiev, mediated by Berlin and Paris. He said, "I would like all 4 of us to participate to discuss the security situation in the east of Ukraine and to end the occupation of our territory." After 3 decades of US-led wars, the outbreak of a Third World War, which would be fought with nuclear weapons, is an imminent and concrete danger. Berlin and Paris both issued statements generally supporting Zelensky and hypocritically blaming Russia for the conflict. In a communiqué, the German chancellery stressed its concern at the increase in Russian troops along the border with Ukraine and called for a withdrawal of these reinforcements so that we can achieve de-escalation. In Paris, the Élysée presidential palace declared its support for Ukrainian sovereignty and stressed that Volodymyr Zelensky expressed on his part a very clear wish for de-escalation. It added that the talks between Merkel, Macron, and Zelensky had centered on the search for a political solution to the crisis and the means to bring Russia back on board in negotiations. It added that officials from Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine would meet in order to prepare a new round of talks on the Normandy format. So-called Normandy format talks began in 2015 amid the international crisis provoked by the Obama administration's threat to arm Ukraine against Russia. Merkel and then French President François Hollande held talks with Russian and Ukrainian officials in an attempt to avert war. Yesterday, Peskov responded to the summit by denying that Russian troop deployments were a threat and insisting that Moscow seeks a diplomatic resolution. Russia is not a party to conflict. Russia is doing its best to help resolve this conflict. We will always work to make that clear. Despite the generally favorable tone of the German and French communiques backing Zelensky, it was more or less apparent that the Ukrainian president's appeals for greater European support against Russia had fallen on deaf ears. On Thursday, the day before arriving in Paris, Zelensky had granted a full-page interview to the right-wing French daily Le Figaro, laying out his agenda for the talks. He pointed to dangerous military tensions internationally. Since Joe Biden took office, everyone has been flexing their muscles around the planet. Personally, I don't want that to be at Ukraine's expense. On this basis, Zelensky asked France to support Ukrainian membership in NATO and the EU. Given its close support for NATO ever since the 2014 coup, our country has made great sacrifices in terms of human lives. We cannot stay indefinitely in the waiting room of the EU and of NATO. It is time to shift into higher gear for us to be invited into the EU and NATO, as we do not want to have to beg.